Hello. This week marks 10 days since the brutal and tragic death of George Floyd, 100 days since the senseless killing of Ahmaud Arbery, and would have been the 27th birthday for Breonna Taylor. Our nation mourns, we mourn, I mourn. And yet I know I do not mourn as deeply as individuals and families and communities of color. That this tragedy and these tragedies hit my home in a very different way than they land in the homes of many of my brothers and sisters. But this is not just about mourning. This is about fear, anxiety, anger, history, and a need and a demand for change in our country. Racism, injustice, discrimination, hate, and violence remain at unacceptable levels in our nation. The incidents over the last few months are not isolated. They're not unrelated. They stem from the same deep root. This unrest is not about George Floyd. This is about 400 years of injustice and harm done on this very soil. It's about systems of oppression and racism built intentionally to ensure that racial disparities continue for generations. That is because we are a nation founded upon beautifully written, yet devastating and poorly lived out values. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all men created equal ring in the halls of buildings built on the backs of slaves on land taken from Native Americans. This great contradiction still haunts our nation today. That is because it is poured into our foundation and weaved into the fabric of our history. And that contradiction lives out in our communities, our streets, and in our homes every single day. Sadly, tragically, and in all too many cases, fatally. This will not stop until both individuals and institutions make it stop. And that is why we see protests and riots and unrest. The people of our nation are speaking with and through their actions. Riots are the voices of the unheard. Protests are the voices of the left behind and oppressed and hurt and held back. And we should not silence them. In fact, I've been asked how I feel or how I react to protests and pickets and petitions against me and Phoenix Union. And on one hand, of course, I prefer not. The people and the system that I love and that I serve, I do not want at the center of anger and distress. But on the other hand, you must understand, and I understand very well, what it is that I and we represent as an institution. This is our 125th year, and we reveal to our community a very beautiful and broken history, a history of our own racism and oppression and discrimination and segregation. And because of that, we too have a history of unrests and of protests. And it is our job today, it is my job today, to listen and not to silence, but also not just to listen, but to act and to be intentional and transparent and authentic and be with and for, not against, our own community. One of the biggest issues and controversies that exists today in Phoenix Union is policing and our school resource officer program. And over the years, I and we have met with many in our community, many who are supportive of our SRO program. And that's not surprising because many in our community view police as a source of safety and of protection. If you're a victim of domestic violence or in a car accident, you call the police out of your trust. And yet I and we have met with many in our own community who are not supportive. And many view police as a source of fear and trauma and anxiety. And that is because policing practices in communities of color have been harmful for generations. With the full support of our executive team and our governing board, I removed the intergovernmental agreement from this week's board agenda. And removing this IGA is about giving us time to mourn, to engage, to listen, to assess, and to reassess. Not just our IGA, but all of our systems and all of our practices. This is also time for us to reaffirm our commitment to our community. Again, not just in word, but in deed. And so we have some very concrete next steps. First, we will assemble a team this week and next week that is responsible for listening, assessing, reassessing, visioning, planning for the safety and the future safety of Phoenix Union, our campuses, our staff, our students, and our community. This won't be the first time. We adopted a next-gen safety security plan a few years ago. Yet we committed that plan and all safety planning would be fluid, would be flexible, and would evolve over time. Our second commitment is that yesterday I met with many of our administrators, and we have committed to building a team to address issues of race and injustice and discrimination in our own system and in our own community. We've done a lot over the years. We've launched ethnic studies programs, trained our people on implicit bias, launched restorative justice and restorative practices, published our disproportionality in our disciplinary practices, changed our handbook, completely changed our hiring practices, and now have an extremely diverse and committed team. Recently launched a partnership with the Carver Museum after learning about the harm done in the launch and the closure of George Washington Carver High School. But it's not enough. We must be an institution that not only stands against racism, but is very intentionally anti-racist. Our third concrete next step is that we'll speed up all of the timelines of our trainings and our discussions and our book studies on issues of bias and injustice and race and de-escalation and trauma that have already existed across Phoenix Union. We have been committed to creating space for these types of discussions and these types of trainings across our system. We've done them not only in Phoenix Union, but for the entire community. But we do believe that these must speed up, and we must get to our staff, our students, and our community at faster rates than we ever have before. And finally, we renew our commitment to our new ethnic studies program. Last year was our first year offering ethnic studies in Phoenix Union. This year, we will expand opportunities to multiple schools. We've also begun our discussions about other forms of ethnic studies. We are committed to not only looking at ethnic studies as a standalone course, but reviewing the ways in which we teach history, the books that our youth read in English class, to make sure that our students are represented, not just in seats, but in the curriculum and in the literature. And we also commit to engaging with many of our partner superintendents to launch a citywide equity initiative, not just in Phoenix Union, but across the entire city. There are many other actions that we will take, but I wanted to start today with sharing these 4. In the coming weeks and the coming months and years, expect outreach, expect virtual forums and roundtables, expect engagement, listening, expect action. Most importantly, expect that we, Phoenix Union, will continue to display our values, our commitment, our belief system, and our actions. And we will continue to stand fully committed to justice and to equity and to equality in our nation, and to love and to respect and to acceptance and for hope, in solidarity and in unity with our community.